It is a busy summer night at Toronto Pearson International Airport. Air Transat Flight 236 is boarding at the gate, a routine overnight trip to Portugal with 306 people on board, many of them families heading home for vacation. After takeoff, the aircraft reaches its cruising altitude of 39,000 feet. For the next several hours, the plane moves through the dark sky above the Atlantic Ocean. To the passengers in the dimmed cabin, it feels like any other peaceful nighttime crossing. But at 4:38 a.m., while most of the passengers are asleep, the flight data recorder notes a change. The aircraft's fuel level begins to drop rapidly. Inside the cockpit, however, there is total silence. No alarms go off, and no warning lights illuminate. At this time, the Airbus A330 was not equipped with an automated sensor designed to detect a raw fuel leak. The system monitored fuel levels, but it lacked a specific alert to tell the pilots that fuel was actively pouring out of the airframe. Because there was no automated warning, a major mechanical failure was allowed to progress in total secrecy. The aircraft was losing its primary power source, and the crew had no diagnostic tools to tell them it was happening. At 5:33 a.m., nearly an hour after the leak began, an advisory message finally appears on the cockpit screens. It shows a fuel imbalance, indicating that the right wing tank is significantly lower than the left. The pilots are confused by the reading. The captain asks the cabin crew to look out the windows for any sign of a leak, but they see nothing but the featureless black of the night. The L-shaped crack in the engine piping remains invisible, hidden by the darkness outside. Flight 236 is now losing fuel at a rate of 13 metric tons per hour. The aircraft is losing the very thing it needs to stay in the air, yet the crew still cannot confirm the cause or the location of the problem. The chain of events leading to this moment began 9 days earlier in an Air Transat maintenance bay. After finding metal fragments in the right engine, mechanics had to perform an emergency engine swap to meet a tight Sunday deadline. This diagram illustrates the mechanical error. The replacement engine from Rolls-Royce was an older design. To make it fit, a technician installed a new fuel tube alongside an older hydraulic tube that was not designed for this specific configuration. The manufacturer's service bulletin stated that these two lines must always be replaced as a matched set to ensure proper clearance. However, a network failure prevented the lead technician from accessing the digital manual, and the offline backup CDs were never checked. For the next several days, the normal vibrations of the engine caused these two metal lines to rub together. Slowly, the harder hydraulic line ground away the wall of the fuel tube until it finally wore through, creating the leak that was now draining the aircraft. The combination of a missed manual and a pressurized deadline created a physical failure, now reaching its breaking point over the Atlantic.
Back in the cockpit, the pilots are trying to manage the fuel imbalance. But instead of consulting the official emergency checklist, they attempt to solve the problem from memory. This was a critical divergence in protocol. The procedure for a suspected fuel leak requires isolating the tanks, while the procedure for a routine imbalance involves connecting them to level the levels. As this schematic shows, the crew decided to treat the situation as a simple imbalance. By opening the crossfeed valve, they began moving fuel from the healthy left tank over to the right side, where it flowed straight out of the existing leak. By trying to fix the imbalance, the pilots were unknowingly discarding their remaining fuel. At 6:13 a.m., the right engine runs dry and shuts down. The pilots attempt to fly on the single remaining engine, but the fuel level continues to plummet. Just 13 minutes later, the left engine also starves and dies, causing the main electrical generators to fail. By bypassing the mandatory checklist, the crew inadvertently ensured that neither engine would have enough fuel to reach their destination. A 200-ton commercial jet had been transformed into a powerless glider. The cabin is suddenly hit by a wave of sensory changes. The constant hum of the engines is replaced by an absolute silence, and the cabin lights go out, leaving the 306 people on board in total darkness as the aircraft begins to depressurize. To maintain control, a small wind turbine called a ram air turbine deploys into the slipstream. It spins in the rushing air to provide just enough emergency power for the pilot's basic flight instruments to stay active. In the cabin, the crew begins emergency briefings for water ditching. Passengers struggle with life jackets in the dark, preparing for the high-speed impact of a blind landing in the freezing waters of the Atlantic. No commercial passenger jet had ever successfully glided this far to a safe landing. Without a runway in sight, the pilots were facing the reality that they might have to ditch the plane in the open ocean. Then, through the darkness, the pilots spot the runway lights of the Lajes military airbase in the Azores, 144 kilometers away. The landing is violent. Without engine power for reverse thrust, the pilots rely entirely on the brakes. The wheels lock up and the tires burst, creating intense friction that starts a small fire in the landing gear as the plane finally skids to a halt. Despite the speed and the fire, the emergency evacuation is a success. All 306 people exit the aircraft in under 2 minutes. Miraculously, there are 0 fatalities. This incident is a textbook example of the Swiss cheese model of system failure. It shows how a catastrophe is not caused by one single event, but by several layers of defense failing at the same time. The story of Flight 236 reminds us that in complex systems, disaster is rarely the result of a single explosion. Instead, it is the result of a silent, invisible chain of tiny compromises that finally reach a breaking point.